Welcome to the July meeting of the Parks and Recreation Board of Radnor Township. We'll stand and say Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it formed, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the May meeting because we did not have a quorum. Although we had a meeting in June, there wasn't a quorum there, so I'm told that it's actually off the record. Nothing really counted from that. So if you've had a chance to review the minutes from the May meeting, does anybody have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're going to move around a little bit on this agenda today, trying to accommodate some nice people who came out to speak to us this evening. We're going to go to new business number A, or letter A, Young Lungs at Play program, Pennsylvania Department of Health. Tammy, I believe we have a guest this evening who's going to make a presentation for us. You want to introduce him?
We do. I want to take an opportunity to introduce Sean McCormick, who's representing the Young Lungs at Play program. He's going to tell us a little bit more about it and then make a short presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A. Sean, if you want to just speak into the microphone, I think right there is that's the best approach right there, and then we have the presentation up on the board. Yeah, if you
So stand on that side.
face the board from, yep, right
Stay
there.
right here and just pretend like I'm talking to the screen. Okay.
Thank you, Sean.
There you
You
go.
guys can all hear me. Very good. Thank you for the invite, Tammy, as well as Mr. Abel. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions or speak outside of this. I want to keep this nice and tight for you all, but please feel free to reach out. My contact information is available by the folks here or on the screen here you can see. So as we move through, I work for a company, a nonprofit called Health Promotion Council. We're part of the state level public health institution called Public Health Management Corporation. Health Promotion Council focuses on preventable diseases mostly. And so Young Lungs at Play is one of many initiatives that we partake in as part of the Pennsylvania Department of Health's tobacco control program. And basically the program entails putting signs up in areas, municipalities, parks and rec centers that have passed a smoke-free, tobacco-free, and vape-free policy. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, the tobacco control program is broken up into the regional primary areas for this. So we have the 7 counties outside the Philadelphia County. We have 20 plus service providers. We provide tobacco dependence treatment. We work on health disparities. We help people access treatments. We train and provide education for doctors, nurses, staff so that they know how the patch works, what the state quit line does, all that sort of thing. But there's also policy and environmental, like tobacco control is kind of all of the above. So Young Lungs at Play is the environmental or policy side of that in terms of improving tobacco control for the state. So along with treatment, we do youth empowerment, we enforce tobacco sale laws, we try to reduce smoking in multi-unit housing. There's a lot of smoking in behavioral health and psychiatric and addictions treatment centers. We work to reduce smoking in those places. Young Lungs at Play, we work on work sites, and we also have a wellness coalition. So the program, that's kind of an example of the signs. They might get put up on the overhead, but we provide these high quality street duty signs, no cost. This all comes from the Master Settlement Agreement. If you're not familiar with that, a number of years ago, most of the states sued the 4 biggest tobacco companies because the industry said that tobacco is not harmful and it's not addictive. Well, it turns out that cost Medicaid, Medicare a lot of money. So the states won, and that goes to fund these prevention and treatment programs to come out and do things like this. So it's no cost for any of this. It's all paid for already. We have signs in English and Spanish. We can help you with your policy. We can do that one-on-one, in person, over the phone, web conference, all at no cost. The policy just needs to be approved and enacted and then vetted by someone like me who has a little bit of experience of like, okay, is this policy strong enough? And it's actually a really low bar to hit. You don't have to, but vaping and e-cigarette devices are now considered tobacco products, so they're covered under the same umbrella, so there doesn't necessarily even need to be extra language. But as you can see in the, I only brought a few copies. I didn't want to print thousands of pages, but there are some packets, and they have some sample policies. But the e-cig language is in there. Typically, these policies are not something that police would go around writing tickets for, although a township could decide to do that. Basically, the signs go up and the social norm is meant to be pushed towards no smoking in parks, just like we don't have smoking in airplanes or hospitals or classrooms anymore. My dad smoked in his classroom all through business school. We don't live like that anymore. Cigarettes didn't even exist 100 years ago, really. So let's kind of go back towards that time because we know that most smokers don't actually want to be smoking. So let's create these healthier playgrounds, right? So it's usually no teeth, although given some of the sample policies, some are a little bit more, folks could be ejected from the park, and there are, so some internal discussion may have to happen. I'm happy to join you in that discussion or just take a look at policy later. But it's up to you on how strict or strong or how much teeth you want to give the policy. But in general, it's kind of a passive policy. Benefits Young Lungs at Play, we provide no-cost policy assistance. We'll look at your policy and help you make sure that it sounds right, that it's enforceable, that it's legal. There's no cost for the signs. Hundreds, you can order hundreds, English and Spanish. And they have the, the basic name of the program as well as the 1-800-QUIT-NOW, so people can get access to free treatment services through the signs as well. And so what are the other benefits? Improving air quality in the park, reducing litter. Cigarette butts are the #1 littered item in the world by far. So just thinking of the folks that have to clean up the parks in your municipality, that's going to be a boon to them. And it just improves the park overall, fosters healthy norming behaviors. There's a full toolkit available at that link, and I can send that around, or you can write it down. But just so you know, the toolkit includes PDF plus Word documents. So if you open it up in Chrome or Internet Explorer, it'll only show you the first page. So if you open it in Adobe, you'll see all the Word documents embedded in there. So that includes table of contents, how to use the toolkit. And then some of this is more for folks like me that are trying to get municipalities to jump on board. But if you want to see policy checklist, sample ordinance, sample resolution, how do you order the signs? The other big piece is media. We can get some positive media for Radnor. We actually work with a media group that would work to create a press conference or social media or get some TV, radio coverage if that's something you're interested in bolstering the image of the municipality. No pressure on any of that stuff. If you're interested, I do have some sample policies here. This is basically it, right? You kind of just drop the name in of your municipality, and then, high quality living would result in a policy that no tobacco products are used, blah, blah, blah. I'll let you read through this later. But basically, no smoking, no tobacco use, no vaping in parks. And so we have these sample policies in that toolkit that you can grab there. The compliance, like I said, it's usually voluntary. So we'll leave that at that. Public health is often, about norms as much as it is about laws. And so it does need to be enacted and approved fully before we can mail signs, and that's up to someone to look and say there's a date, there's a seal, there's signatures, this has been enacted, it's on board. We can mail you the signs then either to a specific location or someone can bring them to you. It's up to you. Okay, I'm almost done. There's definitions of what tobacco product means. It's a full-blown policy. So if you're concerned more about the individual wordage, verbiage, or language, feel free to reach out and I can jump in there. So if you want to go forward, send me your policy, email us there. And then once you do that, there will be a spot in the form where you can submit the number of signs that you want. And then if you're interested, I can help you create some hype through press conferences, letter to the editor, community newsletter, digital message boards, etc. Like I said, we also offer treatment services, so it has the quit line number on the sign. Sorry, there's an extra T there, but paquitlogics.org is the online portal to sign up for the quit line. There are 2 local websites, and there is my information. So this program's really popular. We're actually at the point where we're running out of municipalities that have passed this. I think 60 to 70% of all municipalities in the whole state have this on board already. So I'm very happy to answer any questions, and if things come up later, please feel free to reach out, email me, call me anytime out of the blue, set up a time to meet again. It's up to you. I'm here for you. Any questions? Thank you.
Great, Sean, thank you very much. Commissioner Abel, do you have any comments with regard to this, since this is kind of your initiative? And I do appreciate you working with Sean to get him here this evening, because it's one of the things that we wanted to have a presentation like this, and this is very well done and provide a lot of good information. So is there anything you'd like to add to what we've heard tonight?
No, I think this is, Sean, appreciate you coming out tonight. A great presentation, and this helps residents understand a little bit more about the program. The one question I would have is there's been discussion about setting aside areas within a park to allow for smoking. Is that allowed? If that's in a resolution, are we still able to be part of the program?
That's a good question. I think if it was me looking at it and I had my own druthers, I would say no, that it's not a smoke-free park and it does not qualify as a Young Lungs at Play program, and therefore you wouldn't be eligible for the free signage. I could check with my partners at Pennsylvania Department of Health. They may kind of suggest otherwise, but I don't think there are any that have that carve out at the moment. But that's a question I'm happy to pose to them and see. As you can see, here's the honor roll, which is accessible through the health.pa.gov website. And so every county has, borough after borough having passed this. Do any of them have cutouts for smoking areas? I kind of doubt it, but I'm happy to look at.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that answer. The follow-on to that question is, what do you consider the park? Does it start at the parking lot? Does it start at a playing field?
Yep, so the language that we use will say things like, where is it? Basically, it's the entire property. If it was me, I would put a sign right where the driveway to the park starts, at the edges of the parking lot, and then strategically placed at around the playground, path entries, and things like that. It should be the entire property. Is there a little bit of wiggle room where maybe a police officer wouldn't be get out of the park if someone's smoking a cigarette way down at the end of a lot, as opposed to someone who's smoking right next to the swings while there's a whole family, but there's really no enforcement. So, and really the policy goes through and signs go up, and that's kind of it. We have not had a ton of issues of well, there's still people smoking. It kind of just works itself out. People are smoking less anyway. But let me look into that for you.
Okay.
Because you still may qualify, but my inkling is that it's got to be, the entire property has got to be tobacco-free.
Okay, appreciate it. Again, thanks for coming out.
Absolutely. And I will pass along my contact information once more with the slides and the toolkit attached to both of you, and then if anybody else is interested. Does that work?
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And also, just so you know, this board is a recommending board only.
Sure.
We have a board of commissioners that makes all those decisions, so I think we're in the process of gathering information. This has been very helpful this evening, and I want to open up to my fellow board members, see if they have questions on the presentation. The only question that jumped out of my mind was, the signs are provided free for part of that program, but not the poles that the signs go on. Is that a safe assumption?
That's a safe assumption.
Yes, okay.
We will mail them out just like
Yes,
this.
right.
Yep. But they do have, their holes are cut. It may
Yep.
even, there might be a piece of paper over it, but
Right.
the holes are actually cut. So,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
But yeah, if that was a big problem, we might be able to open up a discussion about finding a little extra funding. The Tobacco Control Project is not super well funded, but it's not, $100,000.
I just want to
for the whole
clarify,
state or
yeah,
anything.
thank
So,
you.
But yeah, good question.
Any other questions from our board, please?
Sean, thanks for coming out tonight. Would you mind putting the link up with to all the policy documents? I jotted half of it down.
That bit.ly, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Actually, Sean, if it would be helpful if you sent a copy of this presentation to Tammy,
Yep.
and then she could forward it out to us.
That's what I'll do.
Does that work okay,
That way
Tammy?
we'll have everything.
That way we'll have all of that?
It does. We'll also share it with the Board of Health as well and try and get a copy out on the website
Great.
too.
And we should,
I just had a couple of hopefully
Please,
quick questions.
please.
You mentioned there were certain criteria which would be necessary for us to achieve before we'd be admitted into the program. Can you give a ballpark idea or a thumbnail sketch of what the criteria is?
If you took the sample policy, plugged your name in, and everybody voted yes and put a stamp on it with a date, we'd go right ahead. It'd take 10 minutes.
Okay. And in terms of the lag time on the signage, we pass a policy, how long does it, or the Board of Commissioners passes a policy, how long?
We typically have signs in stock and then ship them priority, so it's 24, 36
Okay,
hours.
that's quick.
If it happens to be a really busy time and we kind of run out of signs, it might take 2 months. But typically, it's a week or two.
Thank you. And the last question is, in terms of a number, how many signs do you provide per park? Okay.
Unlimited. The funds are there, they're meant to be used for that.
Okay.
So, I mean,
Great.
I've typically given orders 20 to 100, somewhere in there.
Great.
But if for a whole big municipality with 16 parks, Sure, 500 signs, no
And
problem.
we've got close to 30 parks.
Thanks. That's
Seriously,
clear.
we'd be happy if that happened,
Right.
so.
Thank you.
First of all, Sean, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed a Reader's Digest version. We all got it quickly. I just was curious, do you have an example of a park in the state or a township in the state that made a big difference once you've implemented this policy? I'm just curious as to if it really makes, have you seen places where it's made a big difference?
I guess I haven't been to a park where I saw cigarette butts all over the place and then I come back 6 months later and there's nothing.
Sean, I'm sorry, would you stay with the microphone there? Only because we're on live TV, so.
Yep, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. No, I don't know that I've seen any drastic changes, although that said, I don't actually live in the region, so I rely more on our own service provider to say, oh, I see signs everywhere. I was on the train out here and I saw Young Lungs at Play signs leading from a path right off the regional rail line. There must have been a park in, I think, Wallingford or Media or Swarthmore or whatever town that was. They had it passed, and I saw a sign right there. So as soon as you get off the train, you're on park property, there's a sign right there. And so does that stuff build up over time where it's like, oh, okay, you're not supposed to smoke here, honey. You know, social norms don't change overnight. Will the policy be enforced perfectly and will the cigarette butts go to zero overnight? No, there's no real teeth. But will over time people think, oh, well, this isn't really where you do that? And it is a little bit of a lax program, but it's also pretty lightweight. I'm not spending a ton of time to do this. The signs actually don't cost that much. And overall, if you can encourage, more families to be smoke-free when they're hanging out with their kids and the kids are exposed to it less, there's less litter, it's just kind of a no-brainer in a way. But no, I wish there was actually a little bit better, like before and after pictures or success stories. But I don't think any community or any municipality has ever reversed on it and said, well, that didn't work, we just looked like fools, so let's take it down. That doesn't happen. It's typically pretty well received, and if there's an enforcement issue, then that might come up again. But typically, it's just a matter of keeping the signs up. If someone gets knocked down, order 10 more. That's no problem.
Sean, I have a question, and you may have covered this before I came in. If you know off the top of your head, or if you can pull it up really quickly, I know I could research this on my own, but I'm just curious, what other municipalities in Delaware County, or maybe in our area of Chester and Montgomery, are part of this program?
So let's see.
Try to get a sense of.
This is Chester here, Phoenixville. Here's Chester. So we do offer this program to non-municipalities like YMCA's. However, the state now is only concerned, like our deliverables from a contract side correspond to municipalities that pass these policies. So while we might say, oh, there's a church that has a playground and they want a policy, we can give them signs still at no cost, no big deal. But in terms of what is the state happy with us, they want to see municipalities pass this program. And so we have
Can you do Delaware?
Berks, Bucks, Chester, Delaware,
can you
Lancaster,
do
Montgomery,
Delaware?
and Schuylkill. And so I think we're at about 60 to 80% total passage.
Can you scroll down to Delaware?
This is 95 to
Oops, there we go.
99%
Whoops, back up.
updated. These are being passed, on a week-to-week basis too,
Okay.
at this point.
Pretty good representation.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions or concerns or?
Any other questions from this board? What I'd like to do, Sean, if you don't mind, is see if there's any public participation that might have questions or like to provide some commentary with regard to this issue. So I'll open that up. Anybody in the public? Okay. I think we got a lot of our questions answered this evening. One of the things that we had on our list kind of included questions, input from the health board. And I know Tammy interacted with the folks over the Board of Health, and they're still doing some of their research on that. We were waiting for some feedback from them. We wanted to get some community input, which we advertised and asked for this evening, did not get. We found out about information about the cost and the signs, et cetera. We have not questioned the sports community, see if there's any issues anticipated from them. We haven't gotten input from the police departments. So I guess, my thought is, and I'm open to thoughts from all of you as well, is to see if we can move this information, which has been great from Sean, share it with the Board of Health so they can see what we're looking at, share it with the police department so they can see what we're looking at, ask for feedback from them so that when we come to September meeting, we may be able to, A, have some other public comment, and B, consider whether we want to make any kind of recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. That's my thought. I'm open to ideas from the rest of you.
No, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I would agree.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions for us?
I don't think so. Just please feel free to reach out anytime.
Yeah. No.
I'm here to help move this program. It's one of many things I do, but
Right.
we're here for you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming out and making this presentation for us.
My pleasure. Thanks
Appreciate
for having
that.
me.
Thank you very much, Sean.
All right, the second item that we have under new business this evening that I'd like to move to is the Bo Connor Park and Warren Philippone Park improvements. And Tammy, maybe I'd ask you to make an introduction of what you sent out to all of us earlier this week with regard to those improvements, where that stands, and then obviously we're hoping that there might be some community public involvement or questions with regard to some of that as well.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate kicking it over to me. First of all, Sean, thank you for coming again. We appreciate it. We'll make sure all those materials get circulated. It's very, very good presentation. Just to start off a little bit about the discussion tonight on the anticipated improvements at Bo Connor Park and Warren Philippone Park, there was a letter that had been distributed on behalf of Commissioner Abel and the Township that went out to Ward 6 neighbors that are close and abut both of those park properties. So there was a letter that had been distributed. I believe it was the end of June, early July, that went out to anticipate the discussions tonight with regards to some of the improvements that have been actually been discussed for several years on behalf of this board and at the Board of Commissioners level. So just to kind of highlight on a little bit of background, so these particular project improvements come per the township bond issue. If you guys will recall, we had a discussion with the Parks and Recreation Board. We had a motion of support back in 2015, so it was a few years ago, where there was a schedule of sources and uses that was referenced in terms of the township bond issue that was borrowed in early 2016. It involved several park projects, trail projects, and facilities. And it started to tip the iceberg in some of the improvements that are needed throughout the park system. So we've had some discussion on this. There have been several projects that have been in that queue that have been moving along. This has been one of them. So we started having a little bit more discussion throughout early 2017 and really starting to put this project together a little bit more. A lot of the improvements that are going to be anticipated at the park are improvement-based. They're improvement-based projects, not necessarily like adding new amenities and a lot of, major changes. For instance, Clemacrone Park was a major comprehensive project that we did as part of that as well. So when we start to look at those two sites, obviously they coexist. They're part of the same parcel when you take a look at the aerial there, but they are broken down into two separate parks. And when we start to look at Bo Connor, specifically, some of the improvements that had been allocated as part of that schedule and usage really had to do with sidewalk repairs that go along South Devon Avenue. They were fencing repairs along South Devon Avenue, fencing repairs to the ball fields. I started here in 1999, and I don't think any improvements really have been made to that park with the exception of adding the comfort station. Same goes for Warren Philippone. So these are amenities that have not been improved for a very long time. Benches are another portion of that. The player benches at the park. I know the bleachers were allocated there, so what you're looking at on the screen is the information that actually ties right back to the capital budget. So I kind of took that word for word on what was allocated within there. The bleachers at the park are actually in really good shape. They're compliant with safety standards, as are some of the other ones throughout the park system that we recently had replaced. So they wouldn't be factored in as part of this particular project, even though at the time it had been noted that way. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. The playground is something that's not part of this. Initially, the basketball court was something that was not part of this. We know that those are amenities that could be on the horizon, of course, for replacement down the road. So we'll kind of put those on the shelf right now for this discussion. Obviously, there was a set amount of funding that was allocated per the outlined improvements that were noted. So if we start to get into looking at those other things within the park, I think we're having future discussions on capital improvements. So I just want to kind of corral that in a bit. So back in early 2017, the Board of Commissioners did authorize us to go ahead and go to bid on this project. So we have that's been completed. Anytime we have projects of this magnitude, we do need to get that, even though money had been voted per the bond from the Board of Commissioners, as I mentioned back in 2015. So right now, we're starting the public review process on those. And this plan that we're going to look at tonight, I just want to point out, is very high level. I had provided a copy to everyone at their seat, all the board members, so you should have that. I think the one on top is actually Philippone, so the one underneath there is the Beau Connor plan, so we can obviously take a look at that first. It's preliminary. It's for discussion tonight only. I really want to stress that. It's kind of it's a starting point on how we go. And tonight, actually, a member of Gannett Fleming is here with us tonight, the township engineers that actually had put the plan together. Scott Steffi's with us. He's a project designer. So I have him here just to answer some questions as we sort of go through this and talk about things and look at the plan more closely. So just kind of trying to understand some of the goals for tonight. I think what we want to try and do is work towards, getting a recommendation to say, okay, these portions of the project are good, the amenity improvements are good. Now let's finalize a bid specification plan that can actually be put out so that we can start to receive back bids and possibly at some point, maybe in the fall go to construction. It's probably an ideal timeline, but I think it's one that, we want to try to look at. Obviously, it hinges, I think, on public input, and I know tonight we have a few people that have joined us, of course, per the letter that had been distributed, but, we might want to contemplate maybe even having a meeting at the park too, just as another option as we move forward and start to look at that. So if we move forward, one of the things I want to do is I want to look at the plan. I'm going to switch to another document because the one that I had in the PowerPoint is a little fuzzy. So when we start to kind of consider the park, like I said, you all have a copy of the plan in front of you. It's, again, very high level. Really, the improvements that we're starting to talk about are improvements along South Devon, right at, I'm trying to zoom in here, and it's not working, of course. So let's try this. So we have a lot of flooding that kind of happens in collection of water right behind where you would see the home plate area of the backstop. So I'm going to kind of highlight right in this area of the baseball field, the one that runs along South Devon Avenue. So the thought is that some grading could be done in that area and a retaining wall could be installed that would help curb some of that and would help clean up some of this area where the water is pocketing. I know we've had feedback over the years from Radnor Wayne Little League to try and correct some of that. We also have a lot of sidewalk in that area that's broken up. So there would be approximately 101, I think it's 181 linear feet of the sidewalk that would be repaired right in that area. A retaining wall would be installed, and of course I could have Gannett Fleming maybe kind of expand a little bit more on what that would look like, but the retaining wall would be approximately 4 feet high and approximately 32 feet running along this area. Actually, I might have that wrong. I'm not sure if it's 4 feet. I know it wasn't outlined right on this detail of the plan. Do you know what that number is?
It actually varies. It would go from about 4 to 2 as the road slopes down.
About 4 foot to 2 foot, depending on the slope? Okay. So the thought is that that would make some of the corrections in that area. And then if we come further down, we have a lot of fencing in that area that is in really bad shape that needs to be replaced. So it's really just the fencing that runs right along South Devon Avenue. And I want to say, there's a siren. I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's an old siren mounted to a pole that would be removed as part of this plan, and it would be returned back to the township. So the baseball fencing would be replaced along the first and the third base lines. The dugouts, we would anticipate, the player benches would be replaced. The thought is that, we could go to an alternate of an actual dugout that could be installed at that particular space. So I think that's, more of a dialogue that has to continue to happen with Radnor Wayne Little League to see if that's something that, might be able to be part of this project or needed as part of this project. The same would be over at Warren Philippone too, of course, with the 4 ball fields that are over there. So if I switch back to some of the existing conditions at the park. I tried to take a street view to sort of bring it to life a little bit. So you could see kind of the condition of the backstops that are there. They're not in good shape. A lot of the fence is rusting. A lot of the poles are starting to kind of uproot out of the concrete. There's some safety issues in and around that area. If you come farther down.
So Tammy, I'm sorry, can you go back
Sure.
to that previous picture? I just want to, because I think that gives us a pretty good picture of the sidewalk's going to be replaced along there.
Yes.
The fencing along the street's going to be replaced.
Well, the fencing you're looking at right here, we actually had a situation where someone had driven into the fence.
Okay.
I think it's probably been about a year ago now, and we had all the fencing replaced. So that fencing would not be replaced.
Would not be replaced.
So when we start to look further down, you can see right here where it switches
Okay,
over to the
right,
older
the older
fence.
fence,
So that actually run of the fencing is what would be replaced, and it would be spec'd so that it would tie in. with
And
the-
where does the retaining wall, where will that be built along that line there, that fence and sidewalk line?
Right along this area,
So between the sidewalk and the fence,
on the inside of the fencing, inside the ballpark.
inside the ballpark?
Yeah,
okay.
like so on the other side of the fence from what you're looking at right
Okay.
here.
And then the backstop and the fencing along the first and third base lines would also be replaced?
It would,
On that
and-
field? Okay.
So, I mean, we can get into some of the discussions on what the ball field fencing would look like, but the thought is that, this is an image from Clemacrone Park, that the fencing would look like this. It wouldn't have to be black. We could go to a green color if we thought that that was something that was more appealing at this particular site. It just so happens at Clemacrone, we went with black. So if you take a look at the aerial there of, again, this is Clemacrone, just as a reference point, it kind of shows you, what the fencing style looked like there. I know the ball field fencing over at Anki is green. We could go to a green, type of fencing if we thought that that was something that looked a little bit better at this particular site. And those are all details that would be spec'd out whenever we prepared the final details of the bid. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a viewpoint there. When we talk about the ball field fencing being changed at the park, we're also talking about the fencing that is not only on the park, which we usually refer to as Field A, right along South Devon Avenue, but Field B, which is at the far side as well. So when we start to look at both of those, they would be improved. So they would be part of the bid specifications.
So for Field B, which I know gets wet back there and doesn't get a lot of play, gets some practice time, et cetera, you're also talking about replacing the fencing along first and third base and the backstop there. Any bleachers back there that will be replaced or put in?
The bleachers that are back there are actually in good shape.
Okay.
I think it's a 3-seat player bench that's back there now. And if they're not, we could take a look at that. But I believe when we did the bleacher replacement project to all the parks, Enki, Odoricio, all of those, this was one that was looked at. Now, I think part of the situation with this particular field is, yes, it does get wet up in this area. We have had issues with that field for a long time. I understand that, it kind of goes in ebbs and flows, no pun intended, with the weather, depending on the different seasons that we have. But part of the issue with the usability of this field is that there had been, and you can't really see it, but there had been a football goalpost that was really, literally right here on the middle of the field. So we've had issues for years with playability of that field simply because it just has not been safe to play because there's a the football goalpost right basically behind the first baseman where you would be. So what that had caused us to do is limit play over the years. I know we tried to restrict it to some of our younger divisions. I know some of the T-ball divisions that we run with the Township and the preschool divisions, and then that's sort of what has caused Little League to use it more of a practice field. Now, we recently had those removed because not only were they a safety hazard there and precluding further usability on behalf of the sports groups, not just Radnor Wayne Little League, but there also was another goalpost which was up in the foul area. I'm not sure that I could see it from any of these street view there. You can see it from that street view right there. But it's right in the right field foul territory. And again, another safety issue. So those were removed, and we worked with St. Catherine's to do that, and they understand that, you know, those were being removed for safety hazards, safety conditions. And what we agreed on was that we would take their funding that they normally pay us for using the fields and actually allocate that towards replacing with portable goalposts, which is what we hope to have in place this fall for their programming. So we're working on that. So that wouldn't be part of this project. Again, it would really be an operating cost. It's not a big cost for the portable goals, but we'd be utilizing their funding that they normally would pay us for the rent to the field in order to install that. So looking ahead a little bit, if we could just kind of concentrate on Bo Connor for a moment. One of the requests that had come about from some of the residents was that they had interest in taking the concrete and cement slabs that are actually located within the park and turning those into basically a spot for pickleball. So if I come over to here and just kind of show on the aerial, we have a spot that's right here, kind of up above in the park, and then we have another one that's right here. I guess those have been routinely being, I think, chalked out. Just one of them was the upper one. Okay, so this one right here, right, in the upper part of the park. Well, so the request had been is that we could smooth that out so that it could be played for pickleball, possibly as part of this project or another project, of course, you know, moving forward. And, you know, I think if we were going to endorse that as a pickleball spot, it would have to be sized correctly. I think right now it's a 52 by 20 spot, if I'm not mistaken. 52 by 28. And I know whenever we did a little bit of research and tried to look at, okay, like from the Pickleball Association, what do they endorse as a preferred spot and a minimum size recommendation, it was actually 30 by 60. So once you start to look at the outside boundary zones of serving and all that, and you know, you kind of get into a little bit more with, you know, specifics that you would want to, if you designate that as a spot and we stripe that as a spot, you know, we would want to make it to the correct size, or at least to what the Pickleball Association would recognize as, you know, sort of like a minimum recommended type size. So when you look at the plan and you look at the copy that you're looking at with the engineered plan, that's why there's some detail kind of specced around there that there's a possibility to maybe kind of retrofit one or both of those areas and fix them up so that they're smooth. One for pickleball, the other one, which is closer here, parallels the road. I think we would try and just resurface that so that it could be better, it could be safe and better utilized maybe for picnics and things like that. We know a lot of folks kind of use those and set up for different events within the park. But my recommendation would be is maybe if that's a consideration, you know, we try to make it an alternate to the project. So, you know we have this core set of, you know, core list of project, you know, amenities we want to improve. Let's add that as an alternate, and if the budget affords it for what has been, you know, allocated, then that becomes something that could possibly get done.
Okay.
So do you want to move on to, we can move on to Philippone, or do we want to concentrate on Bo Connor solely?
Do you guys want to talk about Bo Connor or wait and hear both?
One question, Tammy.
Sure.
The slab that... I never let it go, excuse me. Tammy, the slab that is north on the picture, is there sufficient spacing there to expand to whatever dimensions are envisioned for pickleball?
This one right here?
I'm sorry, the one higher, I said north, just meaning up on the slide.
I think there would be some grading that would have to go along with that to get it to the size of what would be needed. Because, right now, you're talking about 52 by 28, so if you're trying to get to the minimum of 30 by 60, there's going to be a little bit of work to be done to make that happen.
Same question, other slot that you had, the other the slab closest to the road.
Well, the thought was that that one would just be resurfaced, the blacktop would just be resurfaced, and that we wouldn't make that one a pickleball playable area, because I believe it's smaller.
It's actually larger.
Okay.
It's 55 by 29.
Okay.
So is there, you can't tell from the slide, and it's been a while since I've been over there. Is there sufficient room to expand that one?
I guess there could be, but then you do start to drift into the basketball court at that point.
Okay.
And I know that the preference of, if I'm not mistaken, is the upper one.
The upper one is perfect. We play on it all the time.
Do you want to get up and maybe speak to the mic, at the mic? Just so the folks at home can hear. If you could just announce your name and
My
address.
name's Darcy Gramiak. I live at 118 Morningside Circle, which is within 5 houses of the pickleball court. And I have a wagon full of rackets and a net, and we take it down and we play on that court. And it's very rough, and there's a couple holes in it. And a couple people have fallen and hurt themselves, just skinned their knees or whatever. And if that could be smoothed out without even making it bigger, it is so perfect. We don't need a fence around it because the grass stops the ball. It's perfect. And I have like between 10 and 12 people that come and play, and we play round robin, and we play once a week and sometimes on the weekend. And it's just a perfect thing for the older people that are playing.
Darcy, would you like to see a permanent net there?
It would be nice, but it wouldn't have to be if,
So you bring it up and set it up every time?
yeah. And we have a.
And that's not easy
We have
to
it down
do.
to a science of putting it up, taking it down. It's in my wagon, it goes in my shed. Other people would play
You
if
chalk
put
the
something.
court, it's not painted?
Yep.
And one time we said, oh, let's go down to Macron and play. And we got down there and we couldn't play because it was full. And then Tammy had said they were going to thinking of putting the same thing at our tennis courts, which are constantly full. It's hard to even, I play a lot of tennis too, and it's hard to get a court, except if you're there during the day. So that spot is perfect for, it's out of the way, you don't need to do too much to it. It doesn't really even need to be bigger, but.
Tammy, do you have any idea how much it would cost to smooth it, paint it, and make a pickleball net there? Yes.
I don't. I mean, we could probably get an estimate, as from Gannett Fleming. I'm not going to put Scott on the spot for that tonight, but just like any project, it's going to be bid.
Right.
So we have to see what we get back. Sometimes it can vary.
I
don't know
I imagine,
a full
and I'm saying
cost on that
'cause
right
I do
now.
not know, but I imagine that we get tremendous value for very little amount of money to put out to officially have our first official pickleball court. You know that that's near and dear to my heart. But I'm glad, but I know how hard it is to travel with the net.
Well, I'm making it work, but.
And you're lucky, but I will say that you're also lucky because you can put your
'Cause I
stuff
live
in a
there.
wagon.
Right.
So I just wonder how much we would have to put out to make it a proper
And you
pickleball.
really don't need a fence around it
Right.
because actually the ball rolls further on the cement, so it gets to the grass, it stops. So that's not a problem. It's very nice to play there, and the picnic tables are usually there, and we sit chit-chat. It's kind of a nice night when we're there. So,
Sounds it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, real quick. This is my ignorance coming out. What is pickleball?
It's a cross between tennis and ping pong. It's in between. You use a wiffle ball. 4 people play on a court. There's lines and there's rules.
Okay, you're using a wiffle ball.
It's like a wiffle ball.
Okay,
It's called
all
pickleball,
right.
but it's like a wiffle ball.
'Cause
And you
I'm-
have a different kind of racket.
I'm picturing you guys using this
No.
ball, and how can you say that the grass is,
And now I'm even getting some of the men to play. That would be another thing.
Okay,
My husband helps.
okay.
The other men in the neighborhood are coming out to play too, so,
Thank you.
all right, thank you.
Thank you, Darcy.
We had 72 people play through the winter in the rack.
Yeah.
So Radnor Activity Center, when we redid the floor at Radnor Activity Center, we had fit 3 courts within there. Julie, I know you play over there, so it's been a very popular spot in the winter, but I think folks, obviously when the weather's nicer, you want to be outside and you have an opportunity, which is why at Clemacrone, we had striped for pickleball as well as tennis. And I understand it is being utilized for both. So the thought is that when we do the tennis courts over at Philippone, we would do the same. We would stripe for pickleball as well. But having a dedicated court would offer, a different dimension, because it is different. You have the net height variable that you don't get on the tennis court.
I think it'd be nice if we're going to have an alternate to see what the cost would be to make it an officially sized pickleball court. To also see if Darcy's saying the size is okay, if you just resurfaced it, maybe look to putting that in. As Julia said, it'd be nice to have that as an alternate also. If one's going to cost $50,000 and one costs 10, and the 10 fits into the 400 we have available for it, a lot of people are getting a lot of use out of that. So
Well,
I don't know
yeah, I just think if we're going to do it, and we're going to do it, and endorse it as a pickleball spot officially, because I think it's been, used that way informally now for quite a while, but I think we need to do it the right way. I think we just have a sense of responsibility as the town, just as we would if we were, making something ADA and,
Right.
Making a tennis court, an official tennis court size. So I think if we add it as an alternate, we see what it costs. If the project affords it, then, we can get it done.
Okay, great. Any questions on the Bo Connor piece of it? All right, Tammy, you want to move on to Warren Philippone then, please?
Yeah, let's do that.
I actually have one question
Okay,
about Bo
sure.
Connor, sorry.
That's okay.
The portable goal posts, do they just fold up for the summer, or how does that work?
They would have to be stored. They wouldn't fold up. They would have to be stored. I know that in our preliminary discussions with St. Catherine's, we talked about that. So they would probably be pushed to the edge of the field in the back corner. So they would definitely need to have a storage spot, because they couldn't be folded up and removed off-site. They stay intact. They may be able to be laid down, like in the grass in the back part of the field, but they would still require some footprint that they would take up.
So sort of like the soccer goals at Philippone?
Similar.
And Tammy, there'll be 2 of those portable goals?
Well, we discussed that. I discussed it with St. Catherine's. So, they prefer to have 2 football goalposts, which, has always been a discussion with us, is how do they actually use the one that is, obviously right there along South Evan Avenue at this point. I would assume the ball perhaps, it's got to go somewhere, so it's probably going to end up in the road at that point. So I know that's a discussion that we had in trying to move that down to 1.
And that's still an issue that's in flux?
It is.
Most of the youth places I've seen football played, you walk to the end. If you're going to, first of all, they don't kick the ball very often. If they do, you can walk to one end to do it.
Right.
If you're playing on an existing high school field, you might not. That also would raise additional storage issues, I would think. If you have 2 of these contraptions you need to stuff in there, it gets to be an issue, and it might be an issue for groundskeeping, trying to work around those.
It does.
Items.
Yeah, it does. And then, I would rather move to having, putting the rest of the money into netting, to be able to intercept the ball, when the ball obviously gets kicked. It would get kicked towards the woods, I would imagine, at that point, depending, I guess, how far the kick is going. But it's certainly a discussion that we're having with St. Catherine's right now. Like I said, their season's going to be upon us here shortly, and we want to make sure we have a viable solution.
Actually, Tammy, before we go to Philippone, why don't we just ask for public comments on Bo Connor? Does anybody have any public comment with regard to the changes at Bo Connor? Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving along to Philippone. So Philippone's has some similar, similar but different, different project. The tennis courts are obviously a huge source of improvement that's needed. I believe they're the original that probably has been there whenever the courts were first installed. I'm not aware of them ever being redone in my tenure and being here. The parking lot is another huge portion of the project, and one in which does require some engineering to relieve some of the low spots. We have a lot of water that collects at, I guess, what would be considered the north entrance, as well as the south entrance. I know that the parking lot is getting worse and worse. I know just being over there for a meeting a few weeks ago, it's looking really bad. It's definitely time to get it replaced. The thought is to alleviate some of the stormwater that comes within that area, that a rain garden would be installed at the edge of the parking lot. We'll look at a plan on that in a minute. And then the other parts of the project include the handicap accessibility that currently doesn't exist at the park to get to the tennis courts as well as to the comfort station, as well as the backstop, first and third baseline, fencing replacement, and obviously the fencing replacement that would go around the tennis courts. So if we take a look, I'm going to maybe try and zoom in a little bit more closely on these. I got to switch to another file that allows me to do that a little bit better. So when we were talking about the rain garden, it's the next file down. Okay, so when we look at I guess what I call the entrance, I know some people use the entrance and the exit interchangeably at the park, which is another thing that I think we want to correct. You can see down in this area, the plan had called for a rain garden that would be able to take a lot of the stormwater and the runoff that's coming within that area that's collecting. I know even on a dry day, there's still some water that's left down in that area. And then we would actually evaluate designating two sort of carved out spots for the mulch. So I think the mulch is another discussion we want to have about the benefits of the mulch. Is it being used in this area? Is it, something that the residents regard? Do we want to keep it? Is one defined section adequate? Should we go to two? So the way it was designed currently was to undertake what has basically been there. So when you take a look at the plan, that's what that would accommodate. And these would sort of be carved out with like a stone, like a carved paver type of an area that would define where the mulch would actually be. Instead, now you drive in and it's just sort of all over the place. So we would want to try and organize that a little bit better. If you drive into the parking lot right now, there aren't any handicap spots within the park. So we need to define those. We need to provide that accessibility and pathway to the comfort station. And then we do need to provide that to the tennis courts as well, given the amount of work that's being done in there. That is a requirement that we have in order to do that. So the discussions about the tennis courts wouldn't really entail much change to the courts themselves. I haven't heard feedback to need more or want more. It seems like what's there works, and it works well. One of the thoughts was to put a door, like a gate to the back. I know a lot of the balls go outside, and if we're replacing and designing fencing, that seems like that would be a nice add. The benches that you see that would line sort of inside the perimeter and would be a nice add within this space. I know some of the residents talked about a windscreen. We could discuss that, I think, subsequent to the project, putting some type of a windscreen within here. Again, it was a resident discussion that we've had. I know there have been some folks that have been vocal about the courts over the years being replaced. I get feedback on those courts on a regular basis about the shape that they're in. So we also would like to see some sort of, like we have the signage that had been designated at Clemacrone Park that defines the entrance and the exit ways. So I think that's something that's also important within this area, is to start to define a one-way in, a one-way out. I know some of the feedback that we've gotten from the sports groups over the years is just sometimes it's just a mishmash of people coming in all directions. I know we've had some camps run in this area, and we've met some problems with that. So we want to define that. So the signage would become part of that. There's also, it's not included on this plan, but there are two crosswalks within this area here leading over to Arbordale, and I think another one over here adjacent to where the park sign is that are being discussed as well, that I think internally our township engineer had been working on a plan for that. So those would be bid out, I believe, as part of the project as well. We would want to include that so we could get that all done at once. And as I had mentioned, the ball field sign, the ball field fencing, the backstops, the first and third base lines, those would all need to be replaced as well, which is a key part of the project. So that was the extent that was basically the extent at Warren Philippone of what those would entail. So I think there's some questions that I know we had for some of the residents, in terms of basically looking at the mulch area. We don't want to build that too big if it's not necessary, but yet if it's something that's important, maybe it has to be considered. And also try and get some feedback on the tennis courts. There's also another project that a private donor had brought forth and had been having discussions on with Radnor Wayne Little League that I kind of want to disclose as part of this project because it could come up subsequent to our discussions, but it's not part of this project. But what that would entail is possibly adding an infield that would be a practice infield exclusively for Radnor Wayne Little League. That would include an infield and like permanent batting cages similar to what we have out at Enki. So I just want to switch to a drawing just because I want to, in the interest of discussing this project, I want to make sure that it's something that we touch upon. So this is a hand drawing that was actually provided to us that would kind of, be like a rough estimate of what that might entail. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that this wouldn't be as part of this project, but I know it's something that is being discussed, and it would be funded privately and funded in partnership with Radnor Wayne Little League if it was to come to fruition. So it's obviously something I think that also needs to have some public discussion as well, because it would change the dynamic of what you would see in the area there to the left of the tennis courts as you look at them presently. It also could change the spec on how the fencing at the edge of the courts goes. Because one of the things that we were looking at, similar to what we did over at Clemacrone, was sort of the drop fencing on the side here. Obviously, if something was to come to fruition with a batting cage on the other side of the tennis courts, that wouldn't be something we would be able to install there. So we would want to reconsider how that might be configured. So I wanted to bring that up for discussion as well.
Tammy, just a couple comments on this drawing. And what it is, it's a dedicated infield. So if you go down to any minor league ballpark now, you'll have 3 or 4 baseball fields where teams are playing, but then to get young players, which in this case is you're going to have your 8 and 9-year-olds, more practice, you'll have a dedicated infield where they can get on there before a game, warm up, take infield, and go right from there onto the field to play. In addition, during spring training, you'll have another field where teams will get more playing time, and it'll develop our players quicker, and hopefully we'll see that product play out over their teenage years. And to be clear, right now that space is used for batting cages, so it's not being used for an additional. It's used for batting cages, and when your team's not batting, you're hitting them ground balls anyway. So it's used. We're going to be using it for this. It would be used for the same activities, just on a better surface.
I have a question about the safety of that designated infield. So you have batting cages. Do kids go? How does that work?
My thoughts are it would be. It's an infield, so you're only hitting ground balls on it, and it would be fenced in, and you would have the batting cages on the back side in nets, which prevents teams from trying to do some sort of outfield practice as well or take batting practice there.
Tammy, with respect to this slide, would there, that area over there is a little bit soupy where that practice infield's marked out. Would there have to be any grading that would be done? And if that did have to be done, would that be part of this project? Or would that be something that the Little League would be doing?
Well,
I can't imagine you just plop a field in that existing parcel right now without some work.
It's wet in that area. It definitely would need some grading. I think there was also discussion of, fencing, I think full fencing around the area to kind of encapsulate it a bit. Obviously, we have the area of the riparian buffer lies right within that area, something that would have to be mindful. This is not a project that has been vetted out, just to be clear. I know that there is a resident that had come forward advocating for the project and wanting to partner with Radnor Wayne Little League to fund it. It would not be funded as part of this project. In discussing improvements at the park, I feel compelled to bring it up because if it comes up subsequent to this discussion, then it's like, well, why wasn't that mentioned? So we want to make sure that it's there, as at least that we're acknowledging it, that it could, end up coming to fruition in development. Also, the backside of the fencing of the tennis courts may have to be spec'd as such with taller, so, you're talking about roughly 12-foot fencing, I believe, that exists right now. You're talking about going to what could potentially be 16-foot fencing that accommodates the backside of the batting cages. So as we keep stepping through the project of the general improvements that we're looking at on Philippone, if this project continues to run and comes to fruition and gets vetted out, obviously parallel to that project, we may have the spec just to sort of meet that need. So it's just a consideration.
No, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. However, I think this is a completely separate project.
It
It's
is.
something that eventually is going to have to be considered by the commissioners. I'm not sure I would even want this group to spend any time on it before I had some direction from the commissioners saying that they would consider something like this, number one. Number two, if we're putting township fencing up around the tennis courts, I wouldn't want that to be one side of a batting cage for Radnor Wayne Little League and having that fence getting pounded by baseballs. I mean, I was involved with Radnor Wayne Little League for a lot of years, in a lot of different aspects, but I don't think that a township fence should be part of their batting cage. It should be a separate item, and that they should be maintaining that. So I think a project
Understood.
like this is going to take a lot. It's not going to happen in the next 3 or 4 months or get approved in the next 3 or 4 months, I wouldn't think. So, I'd like to consider what's on the table for the project that's already been approved by the bond, unless folks on this group feel differently.
I think it's wise. I think there's a whole host of issues that type of a proposal presents. And I know there's been, from my former life being involved in Radnor Wayne Little League, there was a significant amount of input from local residents about the cages being up too long or up too early. And I would imagine there might be some resistance to something like that, which should be vetted out. And that's a whole other, going down the rabbit hole, a whole different discussion, I think, if you get too enmeshed in that discussion as part of this project.
It is. The scope of the improvements that have been authorized by this particular bond are replacement of existing structures, not the addition of new.
Yeah, not to mention the ongoing costs. It's great to put something in, but as we know in this township, there's costs to maintain it going forward. Who's going to bear those costs? Because maintaining a practice infield to the specs that the league would want to have, it's going to have to be maintained. So,
Thank you, Tammy, for bringing this to our attention, though, because we won't be surprised when.
Absolutely.
Tammy, if I could, doubling back to the parking lot, in my experience, there's 2 areas where the water can collect, one, essentially at both entrances. Is part of that project going to be some element of regrading of the underlying earth and then a whole new macadam overlay?
It is, yes. I'm sure there's a percentage of slope that's being calculated based on the survey to be able to define that.
Right. The surface is very rough, so not only would we be evening out, fixing the rough spots and the puddling, which causes damage to everything underneath the pavement, so we'd be fixing that as well.
And the mulch carrels, for lack of a better term, in terms of height, how large would those things be?
Do you happen to have that detail by any chance, Scott? Do you want, if you could maybe come up to the mic just so they can hear you, otherwise it's not able to be heard at home. I appreciate that.
I don't know if I can project this at all. I can,
We can switch to the overhead if we need to. If you lay it on that table, Ian, if you could switch to the overhead.
it might be pretty small. It's only 11 by 17. So, center. So this is the detail. It would be 4 feet tall, and on the inside, 10 by 10, and they're 2-foot wide blocks. So this is about what it would look like from a 45-degree angle.
Thank you. I
Does it-
think it's a splendid idea, by the way.
Actually, I'm ignorant with regard to this whole mulch thing over there. Could you give me a little background on it, Tammy? And has this been something that the township's been providing mulch for a number of years at that location?
They have. The township has actually been providing mulch at this location along with a number of other park locations as long as I've been here. And I know that it's all free for Radnor residents. I understand it's very well utilized in every spot. I know we have it at, I believe, Emlyn Tunnel, we have it at Itham Valley, we have it at Fenimore. There's a host of locations I know spread throughout the township where the residents obviously have the benefit, and it's a byproduct of basically all of the household yard waste that goes through the composting that takes place over at Skunk Hollow and then redispersed obviously back out for the residents. So I know it's a program that is very well utilized and very well received. I'm not clear how utilized it is at this space. It might warrant 3 defined sections. I think we have to try and maybe figure that out. I think that was the purpose, to try to get the residents out tonight, was to hear a little bit more from them. Jake, I know you might have some insight on that. But you know, to understand what the usage is could define how large or how small this is.
Can you tell me why it even gets distributed from Skunk Hollow? I mean, why it doesn't stay in Skunk Hollow?
Accessibility, so folks can get to it. I think by having folks go into Skunk Hollow to be able to get it could be very onerous, and there's a safety issue, of course, associated with that. And I honestly don't know the history of the program, but it started before I got here, and I know that it's just something that we've provided for the residents, and they appreciate having it at the parks and being available. It's sloppy. I mean, if you go over to Emlyn Tunnel, it's very sloppy. People come in, they take it, and I think they're well-intentioned, but it just gets very disorganized. And you know, if we feel it's a viable program throughout the township, let's try and make it neater. This just was the thought process and why we designed this.
That program was developed by the EAC about 25 years ago. And the first couple of years, we calculated the value of the mulch returned to the citizens, and it was multiple tens of thousands of dollars that's being returned to our citizens.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry if you thought I was questioning the value of returning it to, I think free mulch is a wonderful thing. I'm just questioning why it has to ever be redistributed from Skunk Hollow, given that I see it, as you're saying, messy in so many parks, taking up parking spots, and unless it's in my neighborhood and I'm going there with a wheelbarrow, I'm getting in my car anyway and driving over there anyway, so I don't understand.
Well, the big reason is
difference.
that Skunk Hollow would be a very unsafe location to have the citizens go to. The exit road from Skunk Hollow has a essentially blind right side coming out. Also, the mulch gets finished, if you will, at the end of the process, and at that time is when they bring it out, and it's for the convenience of the citizens. I mean, there are people in Garrett Hill who walk to get the mulch. We also have it at the Willows, and they did put the new bins in at the Willows, at the cottage parking lot. And it's been a lot cleaner since they did that. So if the issue is the mess, then let's address that issue.
So, Mary, or Sarah, do you have a comment you'd like to come up? Thank you, Scott.
Sarah Pill and Garrett Hill. The reason for 2 bins is the township now provides leaf mulch, which is the end product of all the leaves that are collected. But now that they have the chipper, it will be repaired. They also give you wood mulch, which is all the limbs and everything. So people really, except for the convenience of buying it in bags, don't have to go to the box stores to buy mulch anymore. So it can be a considerable savings to people. And it's also, what are you going to do if you don't return it to them, because you're going to get to a point where you're drowning in mulch. To be absolutely honest, I would never drive a car into the back gate at Skunk Hollow to try and go get mulch. It is way too dangerous, not only with the road, but what you have to go through. It's a muddy path. You could get your car stuck there.
I appreciate that. I believe you.
Not a
I think
place
my
you wanna
standards
go.
are lower because I go there often, and I don't see the problem. But it's not to say that there isn't one, and I respect what you're saying, Sarah and John. Thank you.
I mean, this is a whole different issue, and I don't want to get too far off track, but, I guess my thoughts are, it's great to give the mulch back to the community, but could we do it in 3 or 4 set locations that weren't in busy parks, heavily traveled for tennis and baseball and soccer and all the other things? We do have some parks that aren't as heavily traveled, and maybe put the mulch in 3 or 4 locations around the township that don't have parking issues and kids running through, et cetera, et cetera. That's just one thought, but I think that's a separate issue for a separate day kind of thing. So unless we want to talk more about mulch, if we get back to Philippone, please. Yeah.
Tammy, I was going to ask this earlier, but I didn't think it was that important, but now that we're talking about mulch, am I correct, there's like a mulch area in Beau Connor as well, above the bat?
No, that is actually where you see mulch defined
Yeah,
on the
I was wondering
plan,
about
it's just
that.
that's where the playground is allocated. The
Okay.
playground currently sits in that area. I
Okay.
think Gannett Fleming just labeled it mulch because there's wood fiber engineered carpet that is within there,
Okay.
and that's the playground surface.
Yeah, what I was
So-
going to say is if there's one so nearby, maybe you
There's
don't need
not,
it. That's
no.
too bad.
As a
Okay.
matter of fact, I don't think there's another one until you get to the willows.
I
in
can't
the-
think of one.
In that area.
And this one is heavily used. So if it
Well,
stays there,
densely
the
populated.
bins are necessary.
Yeah, the thought, we just want to keep it organized and nice and neat in the nice new, newly paved parking lot and park.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any questions with regard to Philippone and some of these improvements we're talking about? Any public comment or questions with regard to the Philippone improvements?
Chris, I just have one last one. Do we have a time frame on when this will take place? When these improvements will take place?
So I just wanted to bring this slide up real quick. So the goal is really to get public comment and support and be able to move forward in hopes to maybe get it to bid. Well, let me back up. So the key is to get some feedback. Do we want to make changes? Do we want to add the pickleball court? Are these all parts of the project that we know we want to do? Like I said, the benefit of this project is really just a redo of what's there. We're not moving amenities. We're not changing the park programmatically in any way. And try and, endorse that. And then that way we can work with Gannett Fleming, who really has already developed not only these plans, we started working on these plans months ago, and try and really refine them and get them to where, we finalize the bid specifications. We know we have a draft of that already that accompanies the drawings and, the design plans. And we, would like to get that to bid by ideally September. It would be nice to be going to bid with the project. It could be a 1 to 2 month project to do that, and then we have to award to a low bidder, for the project. That's something that has to actually be approved by the Board of Commissioners. Then once we do that, we kind of work through, finalizing all the details, insurance, and all that other stuff with whoever the construction vendor is, and then we set a timeline. Since a lot of the project entails asphalt, we do run into asphalt plants being closed once it gets too cold. Usually that happens sometimes around early November, mid-November. So is it a project that can get done, by the time we hit fall? Possibly. It'll be tight. If not, then, if we end up running into, that issue, we can probably do some of the work, if possible, throughout the winter. We might not be starting this project until spring. Which might be a little bit more realistic, but not ideal, because spring's a heavily utilized time in that area. So to be doing the parking lot at that point when you have sports organizations in and out heavily as soon as the weather clears isn't an easy situation.
One aside, since there seems to be some desire to keep things moving, rightfully so, I have a safety concern with what you call the A field on Connor and on Philippone, the field up by Clover Lane with the backstop. You have a little bit older kids there that play baseball, and I'd be worried about the stray balls hitting the road. if you use the same style as you have at Macron. Macron does not have as much of a hood on it as some of the other backstops do, and that would be a concern I would have. Make sure that whatever design you have there is you're extending that hood as much as you can over the home plate area to minimize the foul balls that are going to get into trouble. That may also be the case with the field next to the parking lot at Philippone as well, but that's not as much a concern, perhaps because there's some distance from where cars would be. Just a thought.
It's great feedback. I think as part of this, we do want to, work with Little League to make sure that we're, putting the appropriate fencing. So I think that's a valid point and something that should be incorporated into the specs.
So this was advertised and letters were sent to residents in the area about both of these projects, Tammy?
They were. We also had a message up on the website for probably about the last week or so, just advertising the public meeting that's taken place here tonight.
Are you looking for a recommendation from this group tonight? And who, would that recommendation be to the commissioners? To
I think-
authorize you to go to bid, or?
Well, we've already been authorized to go to bid. I think we just want to reach consensus on the improvements. So I noted that it would be great to have a possible recommendation tonight. I hope that we would have had a lot more people out from the community, because I think their input's key to it.
Commissioner Abel, is this I don't know the different words, is this your area?
It is.
So could you provide us your thoughts with regard to this group considering a recommendation tonight, or whether you think it would be prudent to re-advertise and ask this group to wait until September and try and go through this one more time?
So the letter went out July 2nd, and it went 500 homes. I haven't received any feedback, and we have a few neighbors out tonight. I mean, does it push the timeline back if we wait till September and give one more opportunity?
It will. I mean, we could have a meeting at the park, in the next few weeks or in August, but I honestly wouldn't advise again. I wouldn't advise that, just because it's just such a heavy time when folks are on vacation. So, I mean, would it push the timeline back? It certainly would. I mean, at this point, we would be pushing into spring, as we may be right now anyways.
Then I think it'd be okay if the committee gave a recommendation, and if there were neighbors who have issues, it's going to come before the board, and they can, I'll notify neighbors at that time that they can come before the Board of Commissioners and voice their concerns if there are any.
And just to clarify, that would happen during award, if we were awarding the bid at that point. That's when that would occur, when the final plan is there being awarded for contract.
So in other words, Tammy, you could go to bid now. You don't even need our recommendation to go to bid.
No, I don't. This is more of a gateway of, a format and a forum for the residents, members of the community to be here, the sports organizations, everybody, just to kind of come out and talk about it and comment. I think there's still some work to be done to get the specs finalized. So that is going to take some time. But once, those are all understood, and, I know Gannett Fleming works very diligently in putting this together. They already have the base all done. It's a matter of plugging in all those changes, and then it gets sent out through the pen bid system and advertised. And then, I think we wait, it's usually out there for 30 days or so. We define a timeline depending on when that goes out, and then receive that, there's usually then a process of Q&A with the potential bidders, and, it's not a quick timeline. It will take a couple of months. Mm-hmm. And then that's provided that, when the bids come back, they're all accurate. So sometimes we get contractors flushed out just because they don't conform to the right information they're to be providing.
The only thing that I worry about is that if those letters went out July 2nd, and today is July 12th, that's not a lot of time. Yes, Darcy?
Come to the microphone.
I would say, I live Morningside Circle. The people on Morningside Circle are all happy that they got the letter to let them know that's going to happen, because when they were going to put the skateboard park in next to the tennis courts, there were about 500 people here that night. So I can tell you that the ones that I know are not as concerned about that at all, of what's going to happen, because they were here for the when the skateboard park went out. So my guess is they're not concerned, or they would be here. That's just my feeling. I'm here because of the pickleball, not because I'm concerned about what's going on. Okay, that's.
Thank you.
Chris, can I make a comment?
Please.
I think that we're in keeping with what has been projected budget-wise and what, Gannett Fleming has put together and what has been planned over the last couple years. So to me, it feels like it's ready to move forward to at least bidding.
Yeah, I would agree, but I also think that the pickleball court idea is important because I've been learning. I was like Howard maybe 2 months ago, but I've been reading up on it and seeing the activity around the area, number one, and number two, talking with you about the activity over at the RAC. So, I mean, I think that's an important piece. A lot of people in the township would benefit from that if that's able to be included. So, I mean, I don't know that we're looking for a recommendation from this board because you've already got the approval to go forward with the bidding. If you'd like to, you advertised, and I'm fine with it. Is there general agreement with this board?
And is there a way to note that we all agree that the pickleball as an alternative is something we'd like to see included?
Yeah, we can note it in the meeting minutes,
Let's do that.
certainly.
And can
Absolutely.
the engineer draw it in and?
They would. You would spec it in. We would discuss, which dimensions we would want to follow, the preferred, the recommended. I know there's a couple different options there authorized by the American Pickleball Association, because I do think we should follow their standards. So we could discuss that and talk about it, and then it would, get incorporated in. Again, it would go in as an alternate within the bid. So, we have these base improvements. We know we want to get done with the money that's been allocated, but that then becomes an extra if the budget affords it that we get done. If it doesn't, we either evaluate alternate funding or, we have that discussion, moving forward as part of the capital plan. That could be a viable, capital improvement project for that park moving forward, as is many other projects that are needed, like the playground, and things like that at the park.
Tammy, from a procedural standpoint, is this the last that we'll see of this on this board?
It would, unless you request for it to continue to have further discussion.
Okay, thanks.
When we finalize it, I could bring the bid back.
I just request that once you start to get bids back, if it's before or after the commissioners look to approve it, we'd like to be informed and kept up to speed on what's happening with that in the pickleball court and the bids, et cetera.
We could do that, and once the bid is finalized and we say, okay, here's what we went for, we can bring that back. I can provide that drawing back to you and say, okay, here's what the final look at, the final design drawing was what it entailed specifically. That way you have that, and then keep you up to date moving forward as the process goes, when it, goes to bid award and all of that, absolutely.
Thank you. All right, before we move on, it's 8 o'clock, so I just want to give anybody in the audience that wants to make any public comments or provide any participation, give them the opportunity, since they've been sitting kindly for an hour and a half here. So if there's any public comments, we'd welcome that at this time. Okay, having none, and let's go back to the beginning of the agenda. Tammy, you've provided us a copy of your recreation report in our pamphlet here. Is there anything specific that you'd like to point out to us or make us aware of before we move on, or anything else you'd like to go through from a programming standpoint?
Just acknowledge, June is really the busiest month. It started off with a historical statue dedication right outside. I know we didn't really get a chance to talk about that too much in June, but it really was an epic event. I know there'll be a video that'll be released eventually by the New York Giants. They were here and they did a filming, so we'll make sure everybody has a copy of that. We're kind of anxiously awaiting when that becomes available, and we talked about even having a viewing party just so, it could be like another event that's celebrated here as part of the Sports Legends of Delaware County Museum. So it was a great day. We also had the Great American Backyard Camp out, again, successfully at the Willows. Offered folks in the community an opportunity to come and sleep out at the Willows, so it was very exciting. And it's a partnership event with the Scouts, Troop 219 and 284, our big leadership portion to that and making it happen. And we had a lot of great activities that happened as part of it. So it was a big success. We had 308 registered. And a lot of great activities that went on throughout the evening. We had the Radnor Middle School Watershed was there, and they did creek walks. We had the Delaware Valley Orienteering Association that did an orienteering seminar. We had the Delaware Valley Astronomers Association that were out, and we were, stargazing. So there's just really a great event, a lot of great things that happen as part of it, and something that continues to, be a great tradition over the summer. We also had the Girl Scouts participate with us this year too, so just to kind of point that out, we've been trying to corral them over the last few years, and we've been able to get some good partnership events going with them, and they did participate this year. We had a great concert last night at Clemacrone Park. It was the inaugural concert at the new park, aside from the grand opening that had taken place, the first park, concert, Summer in the Park concert that took place. It was Chico's Vibe. I think we had probably a good 400 to 500 folks in attendance. Everyone seemed like they had a great time. Lots of great activities going on and folks enjoying the park in the nice weather.
And Tammy, you're a great dancer too, so good job
I appreciate
there.
that,
Yeah.
thanks. I'm glad it wasn't caught on film, hopefully not. So we have Night at the Ballpark coming up next Wednesday. That'll kind of cap off our community event list for the summer. That'll take place over at Enke Park. We're going to have fireworks at about 8:45, 9 p.m. It's a partnership event that we do with Radnor Wayne Little League, as well as a gentleman in the community, Jim Sears, who brought the wiffle ball portion of the event to us last year, where we have informal wiffle ball games. Teams sign up. They pay a small fee, they make a contribution, and all the money goes to the Delaware County Special Olympics. So it's a great night. Last year we did just the wiffle ball portion of it. The year prior we did Night at the Ballpark, which was the fireworks and the Phillies game. This year we're trying to marry the two of those together. We won't have the Phillies game, but we will have the Philly Fanatics. So it'll be a lot of fun and a great atmosphere, and you don't have to be a great baseball player or wiffle ball player because it's fair games. Everybody gets a chance to bat, move forward, switch sides and all that. It's a whole lot of fun. It's a really great night. So with a little bit of luck, we'll keep the good weather theme going this summer, and it'll be a successful event, not having to move to a rain date. The only other key thing really to highlight is that, the camps are going on. Radnor Day Camp and a lot of the summer camps kicked off at the end of June. Heather DeCanzio, our program supervisor, and Tracy Hardos, who is our program coordinator, have really just done an outstanding job of launching the summer programs and all the community events. So I want to send a kudos to them, as well as our summer staff. All 8 of our key leadership folks with Radnor Day Camp have returned, who've been with us for 3 or more years. And if you add all of their years of tenure together, you're at 60. So our day camp director alone is heading into her 14th year. If you tally in all the years that she attended Radnor Day Camp, she's been with us for 25 years, so she beats me in tenure being here. I think she's one of the only people that does that in the recreation department. So, but it's really just great. We have a lot of one-week specialty camps that are going on this summer. There's the All-Star Sports Camp that's happening at Radnor Activity Center with World Cup Sports Academy. We do the Survivor Nature Camp over at the Willows, 6 weeks of nature camp, which is fantastic outside, exploring the Willows and all the great things that the property and the contiguous properties have to offer. We also have Harry Potter camps, which are just enormously popular for us, and theater camps and things like that too. So there's a lot of things to do, and it complements a lot of the other things that are going on here in the busy mainline area. One last thing, just want to note that Steve McNellis was promoted to director. He's officially the director of Public Works, so he oversees park maintenance now. And then I think we're on par to officially hire a new superintendent shortly. I think an offer has been made. So with a little bit of luck, we'll have someone in that role soon, and potentially someone who's here representing parks on a more regular basis. So I just want to make sure I acknowledge that. Also, as part of the bond, the Skunk Hollow Bridge has been replaced. They did it well, not replaced, it's been repaired. So significant repairs that have been happened to that bridge. We had it in the bond originally for repairs. When we reassessed, we found that just repairs were needed, not replacement. And they did it in one day, so the bridge was out of commission for one whole day. It's back open and back online for the public. So if you get a chance, you won't see much difference to it because a lot of the repairs that were made were in the understructure. But that's one we can check off the long list there of projects that we've had going on. So those are the highlights for June, and lots of key things kind of moving into July here too.
Great, thank you.
And Tammy, I want to thank you from the neighbors on the bridge. I've already received several comments that it's in use and they appreciate that it was only out for one day.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was great. It was lightning fast. Amazing work by the contractors.
Good. Public Works is not represented this evening. Commissioner Nagel, Commissioner Abel, any comments with regard to the Board of Commissioners?
Just want to mention to you that on Monday night on their agenda, we have reports by the 3 firms that are doing the major trail work. I asked that be done because I think 5 of our board members were not on the board when the bond was approved, and therefore want to bring them up to speed as much as just let the public know where we stand on those projects. Major grants were submitted recently for the trail extension, so we'll hear about progress, grants, and schedule. The other thing, hopefully Monday night we'll be appointing a new member for your board. We had 2 folks come forward, so get you up to full strength and make it easier for you to have your quorums. And other than that, budget season starts in August. So we'll be looking forward to your recommendation for next year's budget on parks and park and rec activities, and even thinking the pickleball, given the schedule that was being talked about, that could be rolled into next year's budget. So it's an item you could consider.
Great, thank you. Anything additional?
No further comment. Nope.
Just to follow up on that, there's a trail presentation Monday evening. Is anybody on this board planning to attend the Board of Commissioners meeting on Monday night? Maybe be there? Okay. Just want to make sure that we're represented. I'm going to try and be there, but great, thank you.
Claire's been involved in a lot of the conference calls that we have, the status conference calls.
I missed this week's conference call, but I will going to try to be there on Monday as well.
Okay,
Nice
great.
to know Mary's coming.
Thank you. Anybody care to report on EAC or Shade Tree? Okay. So let's move down to old business. Or actually, I'm going to kind of just go back to what John was saying with regard to parks. For those of you that have had that opportunity to go to your parks and put some comments into that spreadsheet and get it over to Tammy, thank you for doing that. If you have not had a chance to do that yet, it would be much appreciated if you could try and get that over to Tammy, by the end of the month sometime, and copy everybody else on this board so that they can see that. And as we fill that in, it gives Public Works some ideas in terms of what they need to get done, et cetera. So if you could just kind of stay on top of that, we'd certainly appreciate that. So moving on to old business, Willows Park Preserve. Because our meeting in June was not an official meeting, I had read a statement at that meeting, and so unfortunately it's not on the record, so I'm going to unfortunately have to read that statement again. So if you'll bear with me for 2 minutes, I'm going to read that statement and give a copy to Tammy for the minutes, and then we'll move on in old business. With regard to the Willows project and the Board of Commissioners voting to move forward with the lease agreement between the Township and the Willows Parks Preserve Group, I wanted to make a statement for the record to clarify some misstatements, misinformation, and general perception about this board's position on that matter. Our recommendation that we passed by a 7-0 vote on May 10th with reference to the proposed Willows lease agreement was: the Park and Recreation Board supports the intent of the Willows Park Preserve Group proposal regarding the Willows Mansion and Park, but recommend that the Board of Commissioners not approve the lease agreement as currently drafted and continue to work with the Willows Park Reserve Group to revise the proposed lease to address this board's concerns. And we communicated to the Board of Commissioners a long list of specific concerns with the proposed agreement. I'm not going to read that list. And there were some questions that were also discussed during that time. Prior to the Board of Commissioner meeting on May 14th, 4 days later, a couple of communications were sent that were incorrect. Number one, wording from a Willows Park Reserve letter to the Board of Commissioners after our meeting. That wording was, at the conclusion, they, the Parks and Rec Board, supported the intent of the WPP's proposal and with certain adjustments to the lease language recommended to move forward. So this was not true. Wording from Commissioner Nagel's regular email letter to the constituents of his ward, the Parks Board approved on the lease, but with significant number of questions that they would like answered. This also was not true. There was also a statement from a member of the public during the Board of Commissioner meeting that evening that said Parks and Rec had 7 years entrusted with this asset and couldn't come up with a solution. That should tell you something. Not that they're bad people, but they failed at their job to take a solution that was willing to be accepted. This statement is laughable and also incorrect. This board has twice recommended solutions to the Board of Commissioners regarding the Willows that would have cost the township no money, and our recommendations were ignored. The Board of Commissioners voted to approve the lease at their meeting on May 14th with a few of the changes that we recommended. But I felt it was important to get this statement on the record and clarify that not only did this board not recommend approval, each of the members on this board had strong concerns about the proposed agreement and the process that unfolded to get to that point. So that was a statement I read back in June. I wanted to just get that on the record. I'm certainly happy to welcome any comments or input from that statement from our board or from the public or from the commissioners. Okay, thank you. Tammy, is there anything new on the Emlyn Tunnel Park Comfort Station project?
There is. So where we kind of last left things was I think we were just looking for acknowledgement from the Radnor Township School Board that we could do a survey of the portion of the park that falls under their ownership to take a look at the feasibility of locating the bathroom comfort station building within that area. I know we had a meeting out at the park. We looked at some possible locations. The school board, I understand, had met the end of June, and they did give that okay. We have since worked with Gannett Fleming to put an updated drawing together that shows that portion of the park and shows that survey. I know we talked last month, even though it was off the record, we didn't have a formal meeting, but we chatted a little bit. I had made a suggestion that we kind of cut back the footprint of the building, reduce the size of it by approximately 50%, still be able to accommodate the same areas with regards to storage, small concessionary, as well as the bathroom areas, and reduce those to like one toilet, as well as 2 unisex bathrooms, just to be able to accommodate a little bit better in terms of the usage there at the park. And what we did was we worked with Gannett Fleming, we put the new drawing together, and I actually can show a copy of that if you want to take a look at that. Ian, if you could switch over to my computer. It's going to be another one of these drawings that's a little difficult to see, but I'm going to try to zero in on it. So if we look here, we have Garrett Avenue. We have the parking lot area. So what we had discussed when we were out at the park and we had a public meeting to look at some new locations, some variable locations to where sort of be a little bit more palatable for folks who live in and around the area. We looked at an area right off of the parking lot where you see here the batting cages. These are the existing batting cages. So I had Gannett Fleming kind of put some possible locations of again, this would be the reduced footprint version of the building. We looked at one where I think this is where the existing flagpole is. This is one that comes right off here if you come down and off the parking lot, almost where you have, these are showing the contours, the steep slope there that comes down off of the parking lot. And then another area that is over here, kind of in the area where the storage shed currently is, the one that had been moved from this site over to there, so it's accommodating the storage of Radnor Wayne Little League. So there's a few options that sit there. So I think that at this point, what we're trying to look for is, where might it be possible, to put the building. This obviously is possible per the survey and per the definition, of the land boundaries that Gannett Fleming had prepared. So I think we want to try and look at, what we think might be best. I mean, again, keep the project moving forward. I know that in working with Little League about cutting the footprint of the building back and reducing the programmatic areas inside, seems like, they're on board for that and they support that.
Tammy, what are the new or revised dimensions?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and that's the one folder I didn't bring tonight. Roughly
20 by 15?
Yeah, roughly, I think it's 20 by 18.
Okay.
It's 18 by 16.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, 18 by 16.
Tammy, can you zoom out so we can see the whole Emlyn Tunnel?
Like that?
Yeah. So choice three feels, from being at that park, feels very remote.
I will add, I remember issues being brought up. One was accessing it in terms of if they were
Yeah.
stocking it or doing whatever, and the other one was policing it. Are those no longer issues?
No, those, again, we just were throwing the options out there. These have all been asked. I know we had a resident subsequent to the meeting reach out to us and ask about location 3 and can it fit within there. I know I went out and I rolled it and measured it, and then we, obviously once we got the survey, we got the official ability to see if we could even put it in that place. Of course, you would have a longer run of accessibility, so the costs, would definitely go up commensurate to that.
And I thought at that time when we were out there on the field, I thought everyone had agreed to the spot that was sort of like right on the edge of the parking lot.
I think the contours are, do you have a comment to that, maybe in terms of what those contours represent? That's the slope that's within there that you're seeing. I guess we would have to cut that.
So this is not 2 is not the location where we all had talked about, where we were standing right on the parking lot.
Well, 2 is right at the edge where the batting cage, at the end of the batting cage where
Right.
that existing location is. So there's a bit of a distance within
Okay.
there.
So it's different. Okay.
It's in the general location. I think, Scott, I don't know if you can comment from an engineering standpoint. Can we abut this to the parking lot?
Absolutely.
Okay. I would-
Between the parking lot and the walkway, there is a bit of a steep slope going down. It's probably about a 4-foot drop. So there would be a significant amount of fill. And then you also have to think of accessibility from both sides, from the path and the parking lot there. So that would be a decision on your point, whether we would bring the building up or drop it and have a retaining wall on the side of the parking lot.
And can you compare this facility to what we have at the baseball field?
Scott, do you want to come up to the mic so folks
You
at
don't
home
have to
can
be the
hear?
go-between.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
I'm actually not sure which baseball field you're referring to.
This one.
I have not made a
Yeah,
trip.
they weren't involved in that, so he wouldn't know the difference size-wise. Tammy, you don't know the size of the concession bathroom project right here at Yankee, do you?
It was roughly the size of what we were looking at Tennell, 34 by, it's in that ballpark.
So twice as big.
Yeah, it was, very similar.
Twice as big.
Okay. And
Where are we with the snack bar issue? Not at all?
Well, I think the thought is we would include it.
Yeah.
I think Little League feels strongly about including it, otherwise it wouldn't have been originally designed into the building, because, there's really no other need other than for what they have. So I think the thought is we could cut the size of it back and still achieve the same goal of being able to provide the concession stand, the concessionary option, for the players that are there, also achieve the storage as well.
And can you talk about the restroom comparison?
So I think it went from, if I'm not mistaken, 14 by 14. 14 by 14 was the original with both men's and women's, along with 2 toilets per, one with the men's room obviously being the urinal.
2 female toilets, 2 male toilets.
Right, originally. So that was like 14 by 14, I
And
think
it-
roughly.
Excuse me, is that what they have at Enki?
I don't know the dimensions of Enki right off the top of my
Do you-
head.
but they have a
It's
separate
close.
male
It's
and a
close
female?
because it would have the
Okay.
same handicap accessibility, the 60-inch radius for the wheelchair and all of that. That's
Okay.
was going to be accommodated at the original building at Emlyn Tunnel.
And this one has proposed
It's 2 unisex bathrooms.
2 unisex, 1 toilet each,
Yes.
okay. Storage,
No, it's the 2 unisex bathroom and 1 concession. I don't know if you want, I have the plan here.
Ian, can you go to the overhead? Thanks for bringing the drawing, Scott.
and I'm asking this because I anticipate the school board will be asking questions about parity.
Right.
There we go.
So what happened to the storage?
Pardon me?
What happened to the storage that was going to be included in this building?
It's still, sorry, it's still within it. It's still on the other side of the concessionary area. So this drawing was a preliminary drawing that I had worked with Romtech, the same company that we were working with on the original building to define. And this is like a catalog cut, you know what I mean, based on all the options that they have available. So that's where we kind of pulled this and started to look at it. Again, it's just a starting point. This isn't exactly, you know, what we've landed on. This was just sort of, okay, this is a reduced footprint option. Seemed to be something that would work for Little League, would work for us. We'd have to find out based on code, you know, from the concessionary area, how does that have to be partitioned to the storage area? So the top part above the concession would, in theory, be the storage area. And again, we'd have to define those partition, you know, needs based on the code.
I know one of the things that had some appeal to me about this building incorporating a number of uses was the ability to perhaps get rid of those bins that are around each of the fields. I'm having a hard time, from personal experience, figuring out how all the equipment that's in those bins is going to fit in that area, even without sharing it or marrying it with the concession area.
I think it's a question for Little League.
Okay. Because I think that's one of the reasons we endeavored to this project is to create an aesthetically pleasing storage area, getting rid of the existing shed, getting rid of those ugly bins. And I guess it's a question we can direct to Little League, but.
Well, again, within this footprint too, we may be able to custom design this so that that concessionary portion is smaller and that storage area is larger. There's also a larger footprint, like a larger building, like the next model, let's say, that we could move up to that's a different size that bumps that out further. We have that custom ability with the building. So if we think we need to add another 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, we can get to that if we need to. Again, this is just the dialogues continuing to move to get us to where we know what meets the needs. I can't answer the exact needs on behalf of Radnor Wayne Little League. I need them to be able to provide that and say, you know, state that that would accommodate sufficiently to what is there.
And is there some thought as to the orientation of that building in each of the 3 locations?
That's up for discussion.
Okay, in terms of the doors and whatnot, 'cause one of them, it seemed, choice 2 seems to put what would be the swing door into the concession portion, virtually opening onto the existing trail. But I suppose that's something that could be engineered.
It
Yes.
can be, and we can move, it's like a puzzle. We can move the pieces around if we need to, when it's when we would go to final design on it.
Julia, first of all, thank you for taking this issue up to the school board, you and Chuck, or however that was done, so we appreciate that. Any thoughts or feedback you might have with regard to how the school board might consider this project on their property and whether they actually would compare it to what's at Enki and how much effort you think we need to put into that to make sure it's addressed to their satisfaction? If you have any insight on that, I'd certainly appreciate hearing it.
Thank you for asking. All Chuck and I did was ask if the school board was okay just merely considering having it on our property. And a lot of questions came up at the time. Well, what are we approving? Well, we think it should be lots of thoughts. And we said, wait, we're not there yet. Hold off. So we have not had those discussions about it yet because we don't have anything to react to. I can tell you there has been discussion about parity because it is school property. There has been discussion about, and not group formal discussion, I'm not speaking on behalf of the school board, I'm just telling you random bits I have heard. Because it is a school property, there's an argument that we have to still follow Title IX in spirit, even though it seems that that might not. Well, I will tell you, there has been a lot of discussion about how there has been online discussion, legal discussions. I am not a lawyer, but legal validation for parity. Between specifically even discussing things like concessions and discussing scoreboards and discussing potty parity, which is a universal discussion, right? I would like to anticipate a lot of those discussions. I think parity is going to matter. And there's also, apparently, it doesn't have to, not everything has to be perfectly equal. So if one field is deficient in one way but better in another way, that is parity. It doesn't all have to be perfectly mirror images.
I guess my question would be, the Enki is not school district property, so how could they compare from a parity standpoint what's on a township property versus what's on a school district property? And there isn't really anything necessarily to compare this to from a parity standpoint for the purpose of this field.
You're making a good point. And again, I get to say that I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the answer to that. But I think the other issue comes up in terms of, opening up this question, in terms of future liability. And I'll also say this, do we only do what we legally have to do, or do we do what we're supposed to do? That's a whole other issue, not for tonight. But those are things we need to consider, I think.
Tammy, the rationale or the reasoning behind the 50% reduction in the building was concern it was too big?
I think it was to address the concerns of the size, yes. I know we've heard a lot of, vocal opinions on this subject. So I think the thought was that it would accommodate, maybe something of a meet in the middle kind of a size. Also, it's my understanding that this size of a building can also meet the needs of Little League also. I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of them here tonight. We can certainly continue that dialogue, but I think we need to evaluate how this gets them their needs as well. And my understanding is this can.
Sarah, do you have a comment?
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue. I just want to make a note that the neighbors have reached consensus that they oppose a concession stand.
Thank you.
The three locations, the first time I had seen them, and that's fine. I would suspect that if you're placing it in that location 3 along the right-of-way, that the sizing would not be as much of an issue. And maybe I'm incorrect in that. And from an eyesore standpoint, I would trust that looking at a building would be better than a rusty fence and overgrown vines. I don't know if that was a consideration or not, but pretty much anything's an improvement over that spot.
My thoughts are we need to keep moving on this project because I think it's important that it's hopefully in place for next spring for the ladies over on those fields. So to best do that, Tammy, and I'll take any suggestions from this board as well, I think I'd like to have Radnor Wayne Little League review dimensions and give us their ask in terms of size and location, and that we publicize our meeting for September to see if other neighbors want to come out and have commentary about it. But I think it's pretty clear in this township that we need to have some parity for girls softball in terms of what's made available to them in this township, like it's been made available to the boys. And so I think it's important we get this on our agenda for September and try and get it to an end point where we can make a recommendation, I guess, to the Board of Commissioners, who would have to approve this. Is that correct?
They would have to approve it ultimately. So so what I would suggest is having a public discussion and public dialogue. I think we would go as far to send a letter out to all the residents who are in and around the area of Emlenton. We post it on the website. We invite all, members of Radnor Wayne Little League, everyone who uses the field, et cetera. I think that's really important, and we have that dialogue. And then we have to get to a building that, we come back. Like, I need to have direction when I go to ROMTech to say, here's what we want to design, here's how we want to allocate it. We want to work with Scott and his team.
Right.
Here's where it's going to work, and put that together. And then ultimately, when we go to purchase the building, because we have to purchase the building, that would appear before the Board of Commissioners. So that would be an item that they would review on their agenda and then be up for approval.
Tammy and Chris and everybody, I'd like to see a suggestion that the Board of Commissioners make an ask to the township so that it moves forward that way. Because I think the school district, I'm sorry. The Board of Commissioners asked the school district, this is where we want it, this is what we have in mind, with Radnor Wayne Little League, with their specs, move to the next step with our recommendation in conjunction with Radnor Wayne Little League to the Board of Commissioners to ask the school district. Because I think the school district is waiting for the ask.
Well, we would have to go and, once we ultimately would figure out, this is the building, this is the location, before we go back to the commissioners, we've got to circle in with the school board and make sure that it has their blessing.
But their first question would be, what does the community think?
Yeah.
And what does Little League think? And I don't know the order of events, but that's what they'll want to know. Maybe that's the point. Is that the point of the discussion?
Yeah, that's my point, is I'd like to have that fully vetted with the commissioners to go to the school district and say, this has all been done, this is where they want it, are you okay with it?
Well, then I guess then we have a public meeting in September. I guess we have to land somewhere as part of that. We come back, we develop it, we take it to the commissioners, we get their recommendation, we go back to the school board, we hopefully get their blessing, then we start the process of, working with ROMTech, getting the building finalized, purchased, and then there's obviously a lot of engineering that has to happen around that. And then Gannett would have to put together full bid specifications. It would have to be authorized to go to bid, the whole bit, get the, obviously the bid award, I guess the bid amounts back, and then we go to award, the commissioners would see it at award, and then we designate a construction timeline.
Would
Yeah.
this board be acceptable if I take the responsibility of working with Tammy to come up with a projected timeline and recommended process to involve the neighbors, Radnor Wayne Little League, the Board of Commissioners, so that we can determine how we can get it in front of the school board in the best way possible, so we can
Yes.
get this thing moving? Is this board support of that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So then I'll work with Tammy over the next week or two, get a email out to everybody, give you our progress and our timeline, and we'll go from there. Tammy, does that work for you?
That works for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Mindful of the time, at 8:30, 2 hours in, items, Tammy, unless you think there's anything we need to go through on the capital budget, project status, et cetera, I would say that C&D don't need to be discussed this evening.
That's correct. I think the only thing that I would want to say, though, is that, I provided the board with a list. There's obviously the outline of the bond projects, the projects that were budgeted for 18, the ones that were, on the timeline for 19. So just, I would say, as you're looking at your parks, you're going into your parks and considering just the whole park system comprehensively, consider those projects. Keep in mind that there's other projects that sit out there, talking about the capital projects at this point, because I know, come August, we're moving fast on budget. Staff will be knee-deep in all the preparations that are going to be submitted to the commissioners. So we have things like Radnor Activity Center's roof that looms out there. You know, I know we have some project considerations at Odoriccio Park. I'm just throwing those out as suggestions and thoughts. Just, I would say if you just reference this, and then I had also given the copy of the full budget. I know it's a lot of information. It's you know, probably 50 pages of information. Keep that in mind as well. And I can recirculate all of those documents so everyone has those. So when we come back in September, we can have a real productive conversation on what we want to recommend heading into 19.
Great. Thank you. First of all, thank you for putting the summary together. This executive summary to me is very helpful. And then for my specific parks, I can go into the budget and get to the details, et cetera, and hopefully everybody can do the same thing. So, but this is the kind of thing I think that helps us keep, and it's easy to review and stay on top of. So I appreciate that. Are there any other comments from this board this evening? Any questions?
I actually just have one quick one. Sorry
No,
to
no
keep
problem.
everybody. In Skunk Hollow Park or Willows by the bridge that's been fixed, I noticed, Tammy, this is actually a question for you, I think, is I noticed there is a memoriam for a dog, a puppy. Has anyone noticed this? And I just was curious, do we have a policy on this? Is that, you know, somebody put like a little placard that says, there's a lot of dogs that use that park and a lot of people who would love to put a little placard there, and I just didn't know if somebody had asked, if it just showed up, but what our policy was on that.
First of all, I'm not aware of that specific memorial. I know I get lots of calls for memorial signs, benches, trees, you name it. You know, folks want to put it in one of our parks. And I know there's a lot of things that have occurred over the years. I know our park superintendent works more closely on a lot of those and vetting them out and, you know, determining if they actually end up, you know, getting installed within the parks. I'm not aware of that specific one, but usually it's a request that's put forth and we evaluate it. And, you know, we make a determination on, you know, whether it's something that's feasible that can be done, or in most cases, we're asking the contributor to put that together, pay for that. And we, you know, usually pretty specific on wanting it to be somebody who either, you know, is passionate about the park, lives in and around the park, utilize the park. There should be some emotional connection, I think, within the park. We don't have a set policy. It's kind of more informal. I think we talked about this a little bit when it came up about the recognition of Jan Berenstein with the plaque that went into Clemacrone. So it's a bit of an informal process, and you know, we try to work with everybody if it makes sense in and around that area.
I just had some concerns that if we have one,
well, a lot of them
have-
appear there.
They just appear. Okay.
We have plenty of them that pop up, and we've had no knowledge. Folks have, you know, developed them, put them together, planted them, you name it. We've seen a lot of things that just sort of appear that we really don't, you know, we really don't authorize.
Oh, thank you for bringing it up. To get over and take a look, yeah.
I'll make sure we do as well.
Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.